At the beginning of 2026, the word went around Silicon Valley that Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the co-founders of Google, had left the state of California for all intents and purposes. Other people, David Sachs, etc., same thing. Shamath Palihapitiya, who famously is part of the All In podcast, announced that he believed between $1 trillion and $2 trillion worth of wealth had left the state. What happened? Well, I can explain. I'm Ken Lindstrom. This is the Something Venture podcast. You know I am the partner or a co-founder of 8-Bit Capital and a partner there too. We do pre-seed investing in software in Silicon Valley, and I have this podcast. And I talk to people every day all over the world, and they ask me what the heck is going on with this billionaires tax. I've explained it a number of times, and I think I understand it pretty well. So I will explain it. We'll call this episode, Will California's Billionaire Tax Turn Silicon Valley into a Ghost Town? So here's what happened. In the fall of this year, a union in California called the Service Employees International Union, Dash United Healthcare Workers. So these guys are not exactly branding guys. Oh, wait, no, they've got a pithy acronym for it. SEIU-UHW. Anyway, it's a health worker labor union. Proposed that they put on the ballot in California a proposition which would tax billionaires one time, keep that in mind, 5% of their assets. Now, to tell you a couple other pieces about this tax, as people kind of looked into what they were doing, there's two things about that 5% asset tax. Number one, it's on all assets, whether they're realized or not. So, you have a stock, it goes up and you sell the stock and the government takes its share of money, but then that's your money. It's on that. It's on private companies. So say you own land or a, software company that's not publicly traded or even very frequently privately traded. It's retroactive to January 1st of 2026, which explains a little bit why people had moved out of California in November and December of 2025. And it then emerged, and this probably explains the Larry and Sergey thing, that this bill also included your control shares. So let me explain that really quickly. If you can own part of a company and you control a company owning less than all of the company. So for example, in Larry and Sergey's case, they each own about 3% of Google, right? So $120 billion each. Pretty good work, by the way, if you can get it, own 3% of Google, $120 billion. So, you tax that at 5%, right? $6 billion. However, the tax is actually based on the shares they control. Now, what that means, they control the voting of these shares, but they don't control the assets underlying the shares. So just to explain how that works, Larry and Sergey each can own about 3% of Google. By the way, as an aside, when people complain about billionaires, that means that the other 94% of the $4 trillion in value that Google has created went to people not Larry or Sergey. In any case, they each own about 3%, but their shares vote at 10 times the actual number of shares. And so they each control 30% of Google. These are rough numbers. And so together 60%, and therefore it's a founder-controlled company. Well, this tax would be applied against the 60% that they own, or in each case 30%. So think about that. Now, instead of $5 or $6 billion, that means each of them would owe for this one time, again, keep that in mind, this one-time tax, something closer to $50 billion or half their net worth. Hence, Larry and Sergey no longer in the great state of California. Okay, so a union in California puts something on the ballot. It's essentially not on the ballot. They just filed the initiative in 2025, in October. By the way, everyone was gone by December. Why would anybody react to this? It's not on the ballot. It's got to pass. It's obviously seems like a ridiculous idea. It's obviously pushing billionaires, quote unquote, out of the state. Why worry about it? It's not going to get on the, it's not going to get on the ballot. It's not going to be voted on. What the heck is going on? Well, California has a system of putting laws on the books that are, it's not like a lot of places. It's based on propositions. What that means is, and this was actually a 1911 constitutional reform that put things on the ballot instead of letting a representative government decide. So normally you elect your representative. They go to, you know, the capital of the state and they go, figure things out. You go, that guy mostly aligns with what I think. And then he or she goes and, kind of represents you and negotiates, and laws come around, and that's how things work. Well, California, things can go straight on the ballot. The voters of California will then vote on whatever the issue is. Now, here's the thing, and why people are kind of worried that this thing might actually pass. So first of all, there's some number of signatures you need, I don't know, 1,000,000 or whatever it is, to get your proposition before the voters. Well, that costs about $8 million. Just does. You hire people, they go out, they stand on the street corners, they bug people, they get the million or whatever the number is signatures you need. So does a union in California have $8 million? Yes. Yes, they do. The unions in California are very powerful. The second thing that happens is, the voters in California or anywhere aren't super well informed. And in California, the ballots get named very deceptive things. They're not supposed to. The Attorney General is supposed to review them. But, for example, there was an initiative that passed, a proposition that passed a few years ago. It basically allowed crime. It took a whole bunch of things that used to be crimes and made them not crimes. Things that used to be felonies made them misdemeanors, largely credited for leading to a wave of crime outbreaks in California and why everything in your local Walgreens is locked up. I believe that bill was called the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act or something like that. So the point being, in California, you vote on something that's like the Clean Water and Safety Act, and you're like, oh, I like clean water and I like being safe, and then you learn that it's a $50 billion bond that you're on the hook for that went to pay some private corporation. So it's not something that you can control just by being on the right side, quote unquote, of the issue. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who everyone thinks is running for president, is actually pretty strongly against this for the obvious reason. It's, going to theoretically crush the driver of economic value in, the one that's left, which is Silicon Valley in California. So the governor's opposed to it, right? He's a powerful guy. So now why are we still worried? Well, here's what happened. There's a congressman named Ro Khanna in California who represents Silicon Valley, basically. Some huge portion of the NASDAQ and the wealth of our nation, accordingly, is in his district. Came out and has suddenly seen the winds blowing whichever way he thinks they're blowing. Also rumored to be a presidential candidate, and came out in favor of it. And that's when people said, I think this thing is going to get the signatures. I think this thing's going to get on the ballot. And if you call something the one-time, let's get the Billionaires Act, they're not going to be looking into what I just told you about the voting shares and all that kind of stuff. The billionaires, their jobs, their money, and the taxes they pay, we'll get to that in a second, will leave the state of California. So this is interesting, this billionaire thing. Think back in your memory. This hasn't always been a thing, that you hate people who are billionaires. The idea that Ro Khanna, the guy who represents and who was voted for and, should have a great relationship with Silicon Valley, is actually, saying, hey, screw those billionaires, is a little bit surprising. And you have to look at what's happened here. It's kind of interesting. Think back to when income disparity kind of became a thing. Right? This concept that income disparity is a huge, huge problem in this country and the rich aren't paying their fair share, that never used to be a thing. That really kind of came into common consciousness, I guess I'll say, around 2010, around the time of the Occupy Wall Street stuff, if you mention that. Remember, you think it's always been around. It hasn't. It used to be the case that you said, hey, we need to lift people out of poverty. We need to, solutions for the poor. We need to give everybody the opportunity, et cetera, et cetera. But income disparity, the difference between the top and the bottom, is a new way of thinking about it. And it's kind of an interesting framing. The total net worth of the bottom 50% of people in terms of income in the United States in the past 10 years went from 1 trillion to 4 trillion. It quadrupled. Caveat, long way to go, all that kind of thing. But the bottom half of the United States is doing way better than they were economically or financially than they were 10 years ago. If you want to use net worth as the measure, and we're talking about a billionaire's tax, that does refer to net worth. Well, Larry and Sergey are worth $120 billion. A billion, like if somebody's worth $100 billion, if there's income disparity, if you're worth $100 million, they're just in another category of wealth. So of course there's disparity. So it's an interesting framing to think about billionaires, and you kind of think of Elon Musk as being the poster child for this. I will point out a couple things in defense of billionaires, and not to be defending billionaires, but to be pointing out that this income disparity framing is kind of interesting. The simple thing being that you can think to yourself, none of your problems are really caused by Oprah Winfrey being a billionaire or Taylor Swift being a billionaire. And see, that's the first thing, is people often think of billionaires as a guy they don't like, Jeff Bezos, for whatever reason. But many billionaires are people like Taylor Swift or Beyonce or the wife of the late Steve Jobs, who's a philanthropist. There's a couple other things about billionaires in the U.S., and let me say this, in the U.S., not Europe. Many of the billionaires in the U.S. have created something of value. Do you like your iPhone? Did you like Taylor Swift's tour? Do you like getting your deliveries from Amazon every day? Game of Thrones? You like watching Netflix? All billionaires. People in the United States are often billionaires because they created something valuable for millions, if not billions of people. And by the way, as I pointed out a little bit earlier, Jeff Bezos, I think, owns 15% of Amazon, which means that 85% of the wealth created by Amazon is not Jeff Bezos's. It's in the pension funds of teachers and firefighters and people all over the world. So those are a couple things. Billionaires often create things of value for other people. They often create wealth for other people. I think NVIDIA has, I don't know how many millionaires work there. Another thing about, again, U.S. billionaires is many of them give away most of their wealth to charitable organizations. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, I think Mark Zuckerberg is planning on that. And so there's my point, the contradiction to the idea that, billionaires are just evil. They're just taking from people. Here's another red pill for you. In California, the top 1% of taxpayers, of individuals paying taxes, the top 1% pay 40% of all the taxes. The top 10% pay 70% of all the taxes. And so while you can say that the rich don't pay their fair share, they are paying all the taxes. Now, it may be they should be paying more and we need more money for whatever, but one gets the impression that billionaires aren't paying any taxes. That's not true. They are doing certain things, and there are certain tax remedies that we could actually put in place to keep them from doing those things. But a billionaire in California is generally employing a lot of people. They're buying and selling things. They're generating capital gains taxes. They have things that pay them dividends, etc. So what are the problems that people have identified with this proposition, the billionaires tax? Well, one, billionaires have left the state of California, and that money is gone and cannot be taxed. They're going to try, but that money can't be taxed. So all the dividends that Larry pay and Sergey, et cetera, will be going to other states and are lost to California. The second idea is that once a tax is in place, it never goes away, and it spreads and will spread to everybody. That is, many people believe this is neither a one-time tax, an asset seizure, as they say, or a tax just on billionaires. The initial income tax in the United States was a 3% one-time tax on people with incomes over, on like 3% of the population paid it. Got that? A one-time tax, 3% of the population paid it. Guess what? Today, the income tax is not 3%. More than 3% of the population pays it, and it wasn't one time. So people assume that this tax will pretty rapidly spread to the middle class. And in fact, where billionaires control $8 trillion worth of wealth, and that is a ton of wealth for the small group of people who are billionaires, the middle class controls $170 trillion worth of assets. So, nobody's going to be satisfied taxing, whatever that is, 2% or 4% of the assets for very long. And I'll give you one more. There's a guy named Soikat Chakrabarty. I hope I'm saying his name right. He was a early employee at Stripe or Square. He's running for a seat in Congress. He would be representing San Francisco. A very progressive guy, and he has said that we absolutely need this billionaires tax on people with $50 million or more in assets. Now, in case you missed that, $50 million in assets is 95% less than a billion. And by the way, $50 million, again, huge amount of money. But now you're into like, a farmer with a lot of land and, a walnut grove. So to summarize, the billionaires tax is raising a lot of concern with a few people for a number of reasons. One, people have already left California, like Larry, Sergey, David Sachs, et cetera, and their money as well. People are worried that it will stifle innovation in California because people who could become billionaires who want to build companies will be very careful about doing that in California. And billionaires have just driven the revenue in California for so long. And more importantly, it will open the door to the asset seizure concept. And it's not going to be a billionaires tax for long. It's going to be a ongoing tax for everybody, or everybody with $1 million in net worth, including their home. So I'll wrap up with just a couple more things. Well, it's not true that billionaires are avoiding paying taxes. Like I say, they buy and sell things. There's capital gains. There's, they own, if you own stock in Microsoft, $1 billion worth of stock, you get a huge chunk of dividends every year. You pay tax on it, unless it's in a nonprofit foundation. But in that case, of course, the money is already being given to charities and things that the government might otherwise do. There is one trick that billionaires use to avoid taxes, and that is that they borrow money. This isn't that complicated of a concept, but they're basically borrowing money against appreciating assets. And so, they've got their stock, they got their real estate, whatever, and they, instead of selling it, selling the building or selling the shares to afford their lifestyle, they borrow money against those assets, and they borrow until they pass on, and the money goes to their heirs. What happens then is the basis in all those assets gets stepped up, the loan gets repaid, and so the government really never gets paid on the appreciation of those assets. That seems like a loophole you could close. But I'll leave you with a couple final thoughts. And I will tell you from here in Silicon Valley, this is really, real things are happening. Larry and Sergey have moved. Businesses are making decisions about building factories and not doing it in California. It's already having a big impact, and people are quite concerned about it. One thing kind of interesting, this California tax would raise $100 billion one time, but $100 billion. California has a $1.5 trillion liability hole. It has all kinds of unfunded pensions. There's just no way that taxing billionaires is going to actually have that much of an impact on the revenue side in California. We'll see if people appreciate the impact of the flight of capital and companies and jobs from California. Look, California, if you control the government of California, you do control people in one of the 5 Mediterranean climates in the world. And so, not everybody wants to move, even if it costs them a bunch of money, to Texas, Nevada, Florida, et cetera. Anyway, I'll wrap up. Here's the coda. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is working with, talking to this union, trying to get them to pull this proposition, not proceed with it. The issue there is that, well, he's running for president, so he's going to have to give them something theoretically in return for them dropping their interest in doing this. And the problem with that, one might conclude, is that, well, now every time the union wants something, or any union wants something, they'll just propose some crazy economic thing for California, and the government will have to go run to them and figure it out. Anyway, it's a huge issue here in California, the billionaire tax. It's being appreciated by a relatively small group of people. But that's it. That's what I know about the billionaire tax in California. Stay tuned.